Hi, welcome back to Raising Families. We have a very exciting show today, one that is of big concern to myself, and even more so now that I've read some of the information regarding immigration issues, but one that I know that many Somerville families might be grappling with and worried about, since we have a large immigrant population in Somerville, something that we're very proud of and contributes to the diversity of our city, which we love. But these neighbors of ours might be under a lot of stress due to recent developments around laws of immigration and basically the targeting of immigrants. So we're very fortunate today to have two people with us who are from the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinical Program at Harvard Law School. Cindy Zapata, who is the clinical inspector, and Jason Corral, who is the staff attorney. So we're going to open it up to questions, and basically the topic for our show today will be knowing your rights. And as I did a little, just very brief research about this, I could see that there's a lot of points that parents in particular would want to be aware of. So I think we'll just start with that. You know, these are scary times for parents, and I don't know, maybe Cindy, would you like to start? I mean, what would you think would be the top things you might say to a parent who was worried about this issue?
Well, if they haven't done so already, I think if a parent hasn't consulted with an immigration attorney, I think that would be the first. That would be the first step to really assess their situation. Each case is so specific, and specific to the facts. And immigration law is it's complex, and it's something that does change very often. So the first thing that they should really do is if they have questions about their immigration status, if they have questions about the climate or anything really surrounding their status, to consult with an immigration attorney as soon as possible.
And I did notice on a couple of the things that I looked up that there were some places where there could be free or at least low-cost help, because in my mind I would imagine not every parent has the money to consult an attorney. Maybe at the end of the show we could put up some of those resources.
Absolutely.
And if you know any specific ones that weren't listed here, you could
Absolutely
talk about that. Okay. So Jason, I noticed it said that, for example, for parents, if they are detained, there are things to do ahead of, or that they could do things ahead of time in case something should happen to them, so that they could have their children cared for. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
That's correct. And the first step, like Cindy said, getting in touch with an immigration attorney if you need one. A lot of the places will offer low cost or even free consultation at a minimum, and that is important for this second part. If they are detained, then they have at least a contact person in which that person, an attorney, can get in touch not only with a detained person. We have access to the detention centers that no other person has access to, and that person could also help a detained person stay in communication with their friends and family in order to help come about a remedy. But there are also other issues concerning custody of children, and someone that has experience working both in the family courts and immigration courts could possibly set up something ahead of time to assure the children stay safe. There are a number of remedies that somebody can take, ranging anywhere from guardianship to something short of guardianship that doesn't require a person to go to court. It's similar to signing a will or something. You would fill out it's basically a form, have somebody witness it and notarize it. I'm not sure of the specifics, but it doesn't require the court's involvement until it's needed. So there are those remedies. Other things I would say is we keep things on our phones oftentimes, important numbers. You would probably want to keep some very close people that are close to you, their numbers in your head, spouses and family. You would get a phone call, maybe just one. You want to make it important, and you want to have that number at your disposal. Other things that I can think of is keeping your documents in a secure place, and having somebody close to you know where that secure place is. And documents, I'm talking about birth certificates, passports, information related to your immigration status. You want to keep those secure and have somebody be able to access it if they need to.
This is great because these are very concrete things that parents can do. Now, I did mention before we went on the air that I spoke to an immigrant recently who said that they carry their passport with them along with their green card. No, visa. I was reading online, and it actually said that they should not carry their passport. Do you agree with that?
So it's a little bit of a tricky situation. I mean, certainly if you have evidence that you have a valid visa here in the United States and you're legally in the United States, it's probably not a bad idea to carry proof of that in the event that you do get questioned by ICE. On the other hand, if you're concerned about your immigration status or you don't know what your immigration status is, the burden is always on immigration and customs enforcement to show that you're here without documents. And the way that they prove that is, one, they'll ask you, or two, they'll ask you for your documents. You have a constitutional right to remain silent, and they can't force you to give up information that could incriminate you. So if you remain silent and don't authorize them to search either your person or your body, oftentimes, unless they have a warrant, they're not able to get the information that they might need in order to begin removal proceedings. So it's one of those judgment calls where if you have, for example, I have a U.S. passport, I don't carry it around, but if someone were to ask me, hey, do you have ID? Can you prove that you're a U.S. citizen? I would probably show them my driver's license or whatever evidence I have of that. But at the same time, I don't have to. Yes. I could remain silent, request that I speak to an attorney, and then it's up to them to decide whether or not they're going to pursue a warrant, detain me, or let me go.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that particular piece, Cindy? Or?
I think the only thing, Jason pretty much said it all. It's just the risk of carrying your passport is really if you're undocumented and there's really no other status that you have.
See. Yeah.
By having the passport, and if you are stopped by ICE, like Jason said, absolutely you have the right to remain silent and ask for an attorney. But by the act of giving the passport, you disclose to Immigration and Customs Enforcement that you're not a citizen of the U.S.
I see. Yeah.
So that's the risk that they run with carrying the passport.
That makes sense. I did notice too online along those lines that there's a little card. This is under the National Immigration Law Center. A little card that you can get that says "Know Your Rights," and it says that you can hand this card to the officer, and it says, "I will remain silent and refuse to answer your questions and exercise my rights." Do you recommend carrying a card like that, or is?
I mean, absolutely. Especially if it's something, who knows how one will react when confronted with Immigration Customs Enforcement or with police.
Sure.
So if in the moment you forget your rights, you always know that you have that card in your wallet, and you can present it, and it's a way to invoke that right to remain silent. Every individual here in the United States has certain rights based on the Constitution and irrespective of status, and one of them is the right to remain silent. And the right in immigration cases, there isn't a right to an attorney, although it's going to be at the individual's own expense. But there is a right to request it, and that they that attorney be present to the individual.
That's really great to know, because I'm a U.S. citizen, but I had no idea that if you're I mean, it makes complete sense, but that if you're in the United States, you have the rights of the United States. And I can imagine that somebody who's an immigrant, and especially here not documented, might think that they don't have those rights.
That's correct.
But they do. That's
And
really
just
important
to add to that,
information.
there's a process by which people have the right to. So if you're here in the United States and you're undocumented, and you come in contact with ICE and they determine that you are in fact removable, they have to go through a process, and you have the right to go in front of an immigration judge, and there are potential remedies that may be available to you. So it's not like if you get picked up on the street and it's determined that you are removable, that the next day you're shipped off. There's a process in which they need to follow, and there are a number of remedies, depending on individual circumstances. For example, if someone's afraid to return home for whatever reason, fear of being targeted or persecuted in their home country, they have certain remedies available. There's certain remedies available to victims of crime or domestic violence, for example. Again, another reason why it's important to talk to an attorney, set up a game plan beforehand, or perhaps even get the process started, but also to have someone there to help guide you through that immigration process, represent you in front of the immigration court if you need it. Because what happens to a lot of folks too is, you're right, they're afraid, they don't realize that they have an opportunity to go in front of the judge and explain the reasons why they think they should be able to stay. So what they do is they just don't show up to their hearing, and at that time, that's when the deportation order enters. And once that deportation is entered by an immigration judge, it's very hard to then sort of fix the situation. But just knowing that there's a process available to them, and that the immigration court is going to sit down, take the time to listen to the individual case, and it takes time. Sometimes it's over a year or 2 years. I have some cases that are 4 or 5 years, depending on the complexities of the case. But you do have that right.
So this is critically important for people to know.
And just to add to that, that if anyone does have, if they're already in immigration proceedings and do have a hearing, it is important that they go, because they're already on, immigration already knows about their presence. So not going would actually put them at risk of getting issued an order of deportation. So it's important that they go to each hearing and be present.
That makes sense too, and it also makes sense that they'd be afraid of that process. So to have it set up ahead of time really sounds like the best idea. I also noticed this morning, and I'm sort of embarrassed at my lack of awareness of some of these things. I mean, I knew there were scary things going on, but I haven't, it's just, I'm not in the kind of circle of working with parents that I used to be, so I'm not hearing as much about it. But in reading this morning, I saw that ICE can come to your home as well, but you don't have to let them in unless they have a warrant for, that's important too.
Absolutely.
Right?
So a lot of times what will happen is that Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement will come to someone's house and they'll have their administrative warrant. And, they may say that they're coming looking for an individual and so. But like you said, an individual doesn't have to open their door if what the officers have is just an administrative warrant. And there's a difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. If an officer comes with a judicial warrant, that's a whole different story. They're going to have to, depending on what it says, depending if it's the right address and all of those things, they're going to have to open the door. But an administrative warrant is going to be signed by an Immigration Customs Enforcement officer or a CBP officer, as opposed to a judicial warrant that has the court's name at the top and at the bottom it's signed by a judge. An administrative warrant is not going to have that. It's not going to have a court's name. It's not going to be signed by a judge. So in those types of situations, it's definitely advisable for a parent that if ICE were to come to their door to ask to see the warrant beforehand, ask that either the officer slip it under the door or raise it up to a window so that they can really assess what it is. And if it's an administrative warrant, then they don't have to open the door.
Very important. Wow. Okay. Also, I noticed this is specifically for parents, but it says if you are detained, you can ask ICE to let you make arrangements for your children, and that if you have those arrangements made ahead of time, that's an important piece of this. I do remember several years ago there was a raid, I think it was in New Bedford or
Yeah,
Bedford,
that's correct. Yep.
where parents were taken from their workplace and there wasn't arrangements made for their children.
That's correct, and I did a lot of work with some of the families during that raid, and since that time, ICE has created new policies that would take into consideration a mother's status and children in determining whether or not they should remain detained. As far as I can tell, at this time they're still following those policies. Again, it's not law; it's just a policy. So at any time it could change. And they've started moving towards family detention centers where they're detaining whole families as a family unit. I'm not sure if they're going to continue going down that route, but certainly a mother is going to want to make immigration officials aware of the fact that she has young children at home. Also fathers, especially single fathers, but you want to let them know that you're caring for a family, and they may take this into consideration when determining whether or not they should keep you detained or release you. I just wanted to add to it in regards to talking about all of this frightening stuff that people need to be aware of. We've been working, and Cindy in particular has been working a lot with the cities of Somerville, Cambridge, and Boston surrounding sanctuary city issues. And what these three cities and others, Chelsea as well, know is that when members of their community are afraid, it makes it harder for the law enforcement agencies to do their job. And I want to say in particular, Chelsea, Boston, Somerville, and Cambridge have really gone out of their way to establish a safe place for people to feel comfortable sending their kids to school and reporting crimes if they're a victim of a crime. The idea being that the city needs to operate the way it has always operated, and that immigration enforcement is up to ICE and the people responsible for that, which is a federal agency. And so the cities really want to be able to do their job with the confidence that the citizens or the residents within the city know that they can continue relying on the local officials as a means of support without fear of that information being turned over to federal agencies. At the same time, I don't think the cities are intentionally trying to block legitimate federal investigations.
Right.
They're just trying to create a space in which people could continue going about their life in a way that they have been, oftentimes for many years. So
That's really important.
It is.
Yeah. And can you say a little more about sanctuary cities? So that's primarily the whole gist of it, I would imagine. But are there any other nuances that people should know? I like that, particularly that piece about it's not about citizens kind of like going against the government or against ICE. Of course, they're a legal organization. They're doing things that are important in some situations, but more that we want to make sure that people know their rights and that they're protected against illegal or, in some cases, not very humane or at least progressive ways of dealing with these problems.
Correct.
So,
And Cindy's you should talk about some of the work you've been doing in that regard, and not to put you on the spot, but I mean, you guys were just in Cambridge the other day, And really, Massachusetts has been a leader, I think, in this respect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one thing to advise parents is that the definition of what a sanctuary city is going to be, it's going to depend on each city. So it's important to kind of be aware of what the police departments are saying. Cambridge and Somerville and Chelsea have done a great job of just kind of making their citizens aware of what their policies are. So that would be one thing to consider, that what may happen in one city isn't necessarily going to happen in all cities that call themselves a sanctuary city. So that's something that I would definitely highlight. But like Jason said, I think the main effort behind all of them is just really law enforcement wants to be able to do their job, you know, and they want to be able to respond to crimes that are taking place. They want to be able to, you know, count on their citizens as witnesses and all these things. And if their citizens are, if their residents are really concerned and afraid, that really inhibits their work.
Right.
And so, you know, they've really done a great job at trying to create that environment of letting their residents know what their intentions are.
Okay. Given that, are there any nuances to what might be a different thing that happens? So, for example, Somerville would have this, but Chelsea would not. I ask partly too because I'm a tobacco officer for 6 cities, and I'm always having to answer store owners' questions about, you know, they'll say, for example, oh, but my friend who owns a store in Revere can do this. And I have to always say, yeah, but Revere has their own regulations. You know,
Right.
every city has their own regulations. And so it might be legal in Revere, but it's not legal in Chelsea.
Right.
So that type of thing.
You know, off the top of my head, I think a lot of it deals with how they'll deal with detainers. But you know, off the top of my head, I can't think, you know,
Okay. No,
exactly
okay.
which each city is. But that information is definitely accessible online, and it's something that I can definitely follow up with you
Great.
after.
Okay.
What I could add to that is that there's no legal definition of what sanctuary means. And so
Yeah.
it fluctuates. So you could have the
Okay.
label sanctuary city, and you're not bound to do any one thing or another. I'll give you the example. At Harvard, President Faust decided not to label Harvard a sanctuary campus. At the same time, she put in a number of measures that protects undocumented students. She
Interesting.
hired Cindy and myself as one particular measure, and so that our efforts are to provide representation to every single student that looks to have that representation. At the same time, places like Cindy was saying, she said what a detainer is if someone gets arrested and is detained by a state or local agency, immigration has a certain amount of time in which they could ask for that person to be shifted into federal custody. And so they can't detain them longer than, I think it's 48 hours. And if they don't get a detainer within 48 hours, they have to let them go. They can't just hold them indefinitely waiting
see.
for the feds to come get them. And so a lot of what sanctuary city means to a lot of cities is that they're saying, we're you know, give us a detainer, we'll do it, but we're not going to just hold people unless we get that detainer.
see.
We're basically, they're saying, we're going to follow the letter of the law. We're not going to do your detention work. Some of this is related to resources. It's very expensive to detain people indefinitely. And so a lot of cities are saying, look, you have to take custody of the people you need custody of because we can't hold them indefinitely in our system. We don't have the resources. Some of it goes a little further than that. Some people say, we're not going to gather the information that you would need in order to make a determination as to whether or not this person should be transferred into federal custody. We're seeing a lot of problems that we're looking at ways to remedy where there are certain safe zones that ICE would not go into. You know, churches, schools, courthouses were traditionally places that ICE would not come in order to arrest people. But what we're starting to see with the new administration is ICE waiting just outside of these safe zones and waiting for people to either come out of a courthouse, come out of schools, or come out of churches, and then at that time detaining them. We're really concerned about that because it's sort of creating that distrust that is oftentimes so prevalent and prevents people from going about their daily lives. Right. And so I think some cities are really interested. I know the Attorney General's office is looking at this, especially in regards to the courts. They want people to continue accessing the courts as they see fit. And if there's any fear that there could be other ramifications if you access a court system, it's just going to prevent access to justice. And so really that's what the Attorney General's office is. But various jurisdictions have various measures that either they have addressed or that they're looking into because it's a concern.
Okay. We do have a warning that our time is just about up. And actually, we don't even have the 5 minutes that I told you you would have. It just brings home the point to me again that I think this is important enough that we need to have another show, if you would be so gracious to come on again, because I think there are a lot more questions and specifically that we could get for parents, since this is a show for families. But Cindy, just in the last 2 minutes, do you have something you wanted to add or something that you wish we had covered that you could say now?
I think I would only add that, just on the topic that we were discussing about sanctuary cities, a lot of police departments have said, that because their job isn't to enforce immigration law, they're not necessarily going to be asking questions about people's immigration status if they come into contact with law enforcement. So that's something to keep in mind. And that, that again, if someone has concerns about the immigration status, to really seek out an immigration attorney as soon as possible.
Great. Okay, we'll see if we can put some numbers on the show for them. Okay, thank you both for being here, and thank you very much for the work that you do. And let's be in touch to see if we can do more, and also maybe do a piece of the show in Spanish or another language for other language speakers. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.